All right, everybody. It is Steve, the Rogue Scholar. Folks, I'm going to start out before I jump right in. I'm going to be talking about a specific article from The Intercept Ryan Grimm wrote regarding a kind of payola, kind of like a mini bribe with Pakistan in support of Ukraine leveraging the IMF. Many people don't pay attention to this stuff. I was pleasantly surprised to see Ryan Grimm actually paying attention to this stuff. Not used to him having a position like this. Ryan tends to uh, be somewhat of an establishment apologist. Kind of gets a lot of things wrong, but he got a lot of things right on this, and I want to share it with you guys. Before I get started, I want to talk to you all about something interesting. So I know that it's probably taboo for most of us to talk about sports and things like that, but one of the things that kind of jumped out at me, and this weekend was a particularly important one, was watching a young quarterback for the Washington Commanders get shellacked by a championship level team, a team that is perennially, right there at the end in the championship game for the opposite side. Sam Howell had a total of four games under his belt, and he got just utterly crushed yesterday. And I know that this is not the most socialist thing you've ever heard, and I know it's not economics, but there's a point that I'm getting to. And that is ultimately people have a way of assessing situations. Okay. You had a bunch of people that wanted this young kid's head on a platter for throwing 4 picks and being sacked 9 times. Young kid, 23 years old, drafted in the 5th round because his stock had fallen because his junior year in college sucked. Okay. Well, it didn't suck. He just lost a lot of his playmakers. But see, this is the problem with pretty much everything from politics to economics, you name it. You get somebody that doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, and they assess one part of the story, one, and then they make the entire narrative around that one part. I want you to think about this. Young kid, the offensive coordinator said point blank, whenever you see Sam Howell out there, it's probably the first time he's ever seen whatever it is that he's going up against. Okay. So you've got an offensive line that has to block for the kid. You've got a coach that has to scheme it up so that the kid has a chance. You've got playmakers on all the sides that have to understand their jobs. Everybody's got to work in unison to make it work. Well, yesterday, Sam Howell didn't have a chance, didn't have a prayer. So when I think about what we're talking about with economics, I'm using this football analogy because it stuck to me so hard. So many people have one teeny piece of the pie. They don't know shit about the rest of it. The private Federal Reserve. What does the Federal Reserve do? You don't know what the Federal Reserve does. Why don't you know what it does, but you have an opinion on it? Help me understand why you have an opinion on the Federal Reserve, but you can't describe in detail what it does. And I'm not here to apologize for the Federal Reserve. I'm here to make you dig deeper. I'm here to you to ask the right questions. And if you don't know what the right questions are, that means you're in learn mode. That means you don't have an opinion yet. That means your opinion is founded in nothingness. Okay. And this is the problem. So much of the political discord that we have in this discourse that we have in this country, so much of the economic discourse we have in this country is based on people that have some anecdotal evidence of nothing. This is why the right wing has a prayer. This is why the Democrats get away with snowing you. This is why so much shit goes on underneath your face, because in the end, you take one tiny piece of information. And like if the body is made up of 100 parts per million or 100 parts of something, and you have one part and you just create the entire narrative around that one part, you've missed the total story. You've missed it. And so that leads us to the conversation that we're going to have today. And that right now is on the IMF, Pakistan, Ukraine, and how the United States leverages the IMF and World Bank to do its wars by proxy, to do its empire, to do the bidding of empire. Okay. It's important, though, to understand how it works. Now, when you see this, some things are going to jump out at you. This is a relatively long article, okay? But it's worth reading from start to finish. So we're going to do that. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Here we go. All right. So this is from The Intercept. And again, I know that there's problems with The Intercept, but this particular thing is based on a lot of straight up, very important information. Hopefully, you guys are able to follow along. So, U.S. helped Pakistan get IMF bailout with secret arms deal for Ukraine, leaked documents reveal. The U.S. brokered loan let Pakistan's military postpone elections, deepen a brutal crackdown, and jail former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Now, some of you guys may not remember this, but I've had Akhtar Afzal, who is a Pakistani economist, on here many times talking about the role of the IMF, talking about the floods that struck Pakistan a little while back. Obviously, climate crisis hitting the Middle East pretty hard. So that said, Pakistan's in a really weakened position, but the United States likes to use all of its power because they didn't feel the Pakistani leader was appropriately for Ukraine. Let's go. So, secret Pakistani arms sales to the U.S. helped facilitate a controversial bailout from the International Monetary Fund earlier this year, according to two sources with knowledge of the arrangement. With confirmation from the internal Pakistani and American government documents, the arms sales were made for the purpose of supplying the Ukrainian military, marking Pakistani involvement in a conflict it had faced U.S. pressure to take sides on. The revelation is a window into the kind of behind the scenes maneuvering between financial and political elites that rarely is exposed to the public. Even as the public pays the price, harsh structural policy reforms demanded by the IMF as terms for its recent bailout kicked off an ongoing round of protests in the country. Major strikes have taken place throughout Pakistan in recent weeks in response to the measures. The protests are the latest chapter in a year and a half long political crisis roiling the country. In April 2022, the Pakistani military, with the encouragement of the U.S., helped organize a no confidence vote to remove Prime Minister Imran Khan ahead of the ouster. State Department diplomats privately expressed anger to the Pakistani counterparts over what they called Pakistan's aggressively neutral stance on the Ukraine on the Ukraine war under Khan. They warned of dire consequences if Khan remained in power and promised all would be forgiven if he were removed. Since Khan's ouster, Pakistan has emerged as a useful supporter of the U.S. and its allies in the war, assistance that has now been repaid with an IMF loan. The emergency loan allowed the new Pakistani government to put off a looming economic catastrophe and indefinitely postpone elections, time it used to launch a nationwide crackdown on civil society and jail Khan. Pakistani democracy may ultimately be a casualty in Ukraine's counteroffensive, Arif Rafiq, a non resident scholar at the Middle East Institute and specialist on Pakistan, told The Intercept. I want to stop right there. Folks, I think it's super important to understand. Ultimately, super important to understand that ultimately, if you have a, uh, how do I put this, an IMF loan, the IMF puts structural adjustments on there, right? You can imagine doing a deal with the devil or a deal with vampires, right? Where you say, yes, I'll live forever. Please just save my wife or save my kid. And the vampire comes in and bites the neck and whatever. You don't think about it until later, until the payment is due. And the payment comes in the forms of not just here, you got to pay this money back. It comes in a whole bunch of other trade offs that you've got to do. And this is why strikes are going on in Pakistan. This is why the people are really suffering. And ultimately, once again, the US, through a soft coup, using the monetary system to overthrow a democratically elected leader, that was simply not willing to engage in the Ukraine bullshit. Okay. That is serious hardcore empire right there, leveraged through the IMF, through the political elites within the United States. Think about that. I mean, like after a bit, it starts feeling like maybe something is amiss. Something's really amiss, right? I know there's people out there that find this stuff boring. I don't understand why you would find it boring when this is literally the tool of empire, and how few people actually pay attention to the monetary system and how the IMF and the World Bank and all these different groups work together. Let's keep going. So anyway, Pakistan is known as a production hub for the types of basic munitions needed for grinding warfare. As Ukraine grappled with chronic shortages of munitions and hardware, the presence of Pakistani produced shells and other ordnances by the Ukrainian military has surfaced in open source news reports about the conflict, though. Neither the US nor Pakistan has acknowledged the arrangement. Records detailing the arms transactions were leaked to The Intercept earlier this year by a source within the Pakistani military. The documents describe munition sales agreed to between the US and Pakistan from the summer of 2022 to the spring of 2023. Some of the documents were authenticated by matching the signature of an American brigadier general with his signature on publicly available mortgage records in the United States. By matching the Pakistani documents with corresponding American documents, and by reviewing publicly available but previously unreported Pakistani disclosures of arms sales to the U.S. posted by the State Bank of Pakistan. The weapons deals were brokered according to the documents by Global Military Products, a subsidiary of Global Ordnance, a controversial arms dealer whose entanglements with less than reputable figures in Ukraine were the subject of a recent New York Times article. Documenting, outlining the money trail and talks with U.S. officials include American and Pakistani contracts, licensing, and requisition documents related to U.S. broker deals to buy Pakistani military weapons for Ukraine. The economic capital and political goodwill from the arms sales played a key role in helping secure the bailout from the IMF, with the State Department agreeing to take the IMF into confidence regarding the undisclosed weapons deal, according to sources with knowledge of the arrangement and confirmed by a related document. To win the loan, Pakistan had been told by the IMF it had to meet certain financing and refinancing targets related to its debt and foreign investment, targets that the country was struggling to meet. The weapons sales came to the rescue, with the funds garnered from the sale of munitions for Ukraine going a long way to cover the gap. Securing the excuse me, Securing the loan eased economic pressure, enabling the military government to delay elections, a potential reckoning in the long aftermath of Khan's removal, and deepen the crackdown against Khan's supporters and other dissenters. The U.S. remained largely silent about the extraordinary scale of human rights violations that pushed the future of Pakistan's embattled democracy into doubt. The premise is that we have to save Ukraine. We have to save this frontier of democracy on the eastern perimeter of Europe, said Rafiq. And then this brown Asian country has to pay the price. So they can be a dictatorship. Their people can be denied the freedoms that every other celebrity in this country is saying we need to support Ukraine, for the ability to choose our own leaders, ability to have civic freedoms, the rule of law, all these sorts of things that may differentiate many European countries and consolidated democracies from Russia, whatever. Anyway, bombs for bailouts. On May 23rd, 2023, according to the Intercept's investigation, Pakistani ambassador to the U.S., Masood Khan, sat down with Assistant Secretary of State, then Donald Liu, at the State Department in Washington, D.C., for a meeting about how Pakistani arms sales to the Ukraine could shore up its financial position in the eyes of the IMF. The goal of the sit-down, held on a Tuesday, was to hash out the details of the arrangement ahead of an upcoming meeting in Islamabad the following Friday between U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan Donald Blum and then Finance Minister Ishaq Dar. Liu told Khan in the May 23rd meeting that the U.S. had cleared payment for the Pakistani munitions production and would tell the IMF confidentially about the program. Liu acknowledged that Pakistanis believed the arms contribution to be worth 900 million, which would help cover a remaining gap in the financing required by the IMF, pegged at roughly 2 billion. What precise figure the US would relay to the IMF remained to be negotiated, he told Khan. At the meeting on Friday, Dar brought up the IMF question with Blom, according to a report in Pakistan Today, which said that the meeting highlighted the significance of addressing the stalled IMF deal and finding effective solutions to Pakistan's economic challenges. Let's just stop right there for just a second. Let's stop right there. So, when you think about this, right, Pakistan got slaughtered with massive floods. It destroyed their ability to produce food. It destroyed their ability to survive. They're in a very, very arid place that has very tough time getting its own food sovereignty. They've got to import massive amounts of food, import massive amounts of infrastructure because they don't have a lot of the advanced value added products and services within the country. So they are left. Now, politically, they could do this internally if they could, but they don't. There's no unity amongst Arab nations in terms of supporting one another in the proper way that we would like to see all groups work. But ultimately, the IMF is there to save the day. Once again, the IMF is there to offer up these structural adjustments by forcing them to do things in a capitalist fashion to objectionable causes such as the Ukraine war, and offering up very little other than loans with severe penalties, hard terms, and ultimately forcing the country into basically a military run country. They lost the democratic rule that they had. If even that was very, very tenuous at best. So ultimately, you see the use once again of the IMF to strip away democracies. You see the United States using its strong arm across the continent, across the pond, so to speak, and into the Middle East once again. This is not new. This is not unusual. This is the standard operating procedure. So with that, let's keep going. After the publication of the story in the Pakistani Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a statement saying the article is baseless and fabricated, the spokesperson said. The bailout was successfully negotiated between Pakistan and the IMF to implement difficult but essential economic reforms. Folks, reforms for capitalism, reforms for allowing multinationals and huge global corporations to walk right in the door and extract from Pakistan, all in the name of freeing markets and doing the neoliberal US bidding. Okay. Giving any other color to these negotiations is disingenuous, the spokesperson said. Pakistan maintains a policy of strict neutrality in the dispute between Ukraine and Russia, and in that context does not provide any arms and ammunition to them. Pakistan's defense exports are always accompanied with strict end user requirements. A spokesperson for the State Department denied the U.S. played any role in helping procure the loan. Negotiations over the IMF review were a matter for discussion between Pakistan and IMF officials. Let's be fair, the IMF, a absolute long arm of U.S. empire, okay, between and IMF officials. The spokesperson said the United States was not party to those discussions, although we continue to encourage Pakistan to engage constructively with the IMF on its reform program. An IMF spokesperson denied the institution was pressured, but did not comment on whether it was taken into confidence about the weapons program. We categorically deny the allegation that there was any external pressure on the IMF in one way or the other while discussing support to Pakistan. The IMF spokesperson, Rhonda El-Nagar, Global Ordnance, the firm involved in the arms deal, did not respond to a request for comment. The State Department's denial was contradicted by Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen, a leading voice in Washington on foreign affairs. Earlier this month, Van Hollen told a group of Pakistani journalists the United States has been very instrumental in making sure the IMF came forward with its emergency economic relief. Van Hollen, whose parents were both stationed in Pakistan as State Department officials, was born in Karachi and is known to be the closest observer of Pakistan in Congress. In an interview with The Intercept at the Capitol on Tuesday, Van Hollen said that his knowledge of the U.S. role in facilitating the IMF loan came directly from the Biden administration. Ouch! My understanding, based on conversations with folks in the administration, has been that we supported the IMF loan package given the desperate economic situation in Pakistan. 11th hour IMF deal. The diplomatic discussions about the loan came a month before a June 30 deadline for the IMF's review of a planned billion-dollar payment, part of a $6 billion agreement made in 2019. A failed review would mean no cash infusion, but in the months and weeks ahead of the deadline, Pakistani officials publicly denied that they face serious challenges in financing the new loan. In early 2023, Dar, the finance minister, said that external financing assurance, in other words, financial commitments from places like China, the Gulf states, or the US, were not a condition the IMF was insisting Pakistan meet. In March 2023, however, the IMF representative in charge of dealing with Pakistan publicly contradicted Dar's rosy assessment. IMF's Esther Perez Ruiz sent an email to Reuters that all borrowers need to be able to demonstrate that they can finance repayments. Pakistan is no exception. Now, let's think about this. Okay. Let's think about this for just a second. Okay. Let's think about this momentarily. When you think about financing foreign debt, in other words, debt denominated in another currency, okay, you got to do something to get someone else's currency to be able to make the payments. Okay. This is the payola. This is the stuff they're not telling you. And I don't, for the life of me, know why people can't get this part of it. This is the most brutal, ruthless part of the US empire and how we used to monitor. Think about it. Pakistan is suffering. They had massive floods, widespread pestilence. Their need for money is humanitarian. It's like you having a heart attack and somebody's sitting there waiting to make a profit off of helping you live. And if you don't live, they don't help you. Oh, I mean, you can't pay? Oh, so we're not going to help you. This is the same thing, except instead of just helping them, they associated their ability to pay with their trade-off to selling munitions to Ukraine that would have otherwise not been done. Who's benefiting here? Oh, that's right, the military contractors. Let's keep going. The IMF statement sent Pakistani officials scrambling for a solution. The required financing, according to public reporting and confirmed by sources with knowledge of the arrangement, was set at $6 billion. To reach that goal, Pakistani government claimed it had secured roughly $4 billion in commitments from Gulf countries. The secret arms deal for Ukraine would allow Pakistan to add nearly another $1 billion to its balance sheet if the U.S. would let the IMF in on the secret. It was at an impasse because the remaining $2 billion, said Rafiq, the Middle East Institute scholar. So if that figure is accurate, the $900 million, that's almost half of that. That's pretty substantial in terms of that gap that had to be bridged. On June 29th, a day before, hold on, let's stop for just a second. Let's take that just for a second. If you think about it, what did they just do? They literally just said, hey, listen, you've got to be able to demonstrate repayment. Well, this secret deal with selling arms to Ukraine, okay, wasn't public knowledge. So they had to let IMF in on the fact that they were going to do this deal to, in fact, allow them to get the money they needed to bail Pakistan out of absolute poverty conditions, pestilence, you name it. Think about that. Think about that. This is not the Trump administration. Hey, this is not the Trump administration. Did you know that? It's not the Trump administration. Fuck Trump. This is not the Trump administration. This is what your democratically elected Democratic Party and the people they've appointed are doing. Well played. Got to be proud of that, right? Here we go. So On June 29th, the day before the original program was set to expire, the IMF made a surprise announcement. And instead of extending the previous series of loans and releasing the next 1.1 billion installment, the bank would instead be entering an agreement called a standby arrangement with fewer strings attached, more favorable terms, and valued at $3 billion. Look at that. Look. Let's read that again. On June 29th, a day before the original program was set to expire, the IMF made a surprise announcement. Then instead of extending the previous series of loans and releasing the next 1.1 billion installment, bank would instead be entering an agreement called a standby arrangement. Not a bad deal if you can get it, with fewer strings attached, still strings, but fewer strings, much more favorable terms, valued at 3 billion, more, almost 3 times the amount of that next installment payment. Think about that. The agreement included the conditions that the currency, wait a minute, listen, folks, listen to this. This is for those people that ignore MMT, you're really, really fucking yourselves. Okay. The agreement included the conditions that the currency would be allowed to float freely. In other words, be not pegged to anything else, to be a free floating currency like the US dollar. Okay. And energy subsidies would be withdrawn. Think about that. Energy subsidies would be withdrawn, right? The deal was finalized in July after Parliament approved the conditions, including a nearly 50% increase in the cost of energy. Think about that. They removed all, folks, hold on. I need you to see me. I need you to hear me on this. They literally sat there and removed subsidies that kept energy prices low for the regular impoverished Pakistani people. Okay. And they went up nearly 50% at the behest of the IMF structural adjustments. This is why you must pay attention to MMT. This is why you must pay attention to economics. And this is the real war. If you don't understand war, if you're, I'm anti-war, but I can't stand that economic stuff. Well, you're missing the war, because that's the war. That's the fucking war. How many people do you think die of poverty? How many people do you think die of disease and malnutrition and a lack of access to healthcare? Hey, it happens in this country, and fucking liberal idiots get mad at me for saying things like austerity is murder. Okay? Well, I'm right. You're wrong. End of story. Moving on. I'm dead serious. This shit pisses me off so badly. All right. Woo! The deal was finalized in July after Parliament approved the conditions, including a nearly 50% increase in the cost of energy. Uzair Yunus, director of the Pakistan Initiative at the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center, said that the IMF deal was critical to Pakistan's short-term economic survival. Had that not happened, there would have been a full-blown economic meltdown in the country. So it was a make or break moment. Now, let me say something to y'all. Y'all probably won't pay much attention. At least those that don't want to pay attention won't pay attention. But let's say this right now. When you consider, okay, a country cannot go broke on debt denominated in their own currency, you hear a lot of really, truly atrocious people saying they were printing money in Zimbabwe, that they were printing money in Weimar Republic, that they were printing money all over the place. But guess what? Printing of money had nothing to do with it. It had to do with debt denominated in a foreign currency. And if you notice, they said it can't be pegged to another, had to be free floating. Why is that? Because free floating allows the most fiscal space. Pegging a currency would have allowed them to be screwed with by other financial interests. Okay. So allowing a free floating allows it to be speculated upon. Now speculators can mess with it. Okay. Unless, of course, you're worried about domestic spending. The domestic spending doesn't matter. But because Pakistan does not have the value-added services necessary to be able to allow it to do things internally, it is a slave, if you will, to having to import things, which means they need the currency from those other countries to be able to buy goods and services for their absolutely pestilence impoverished nation. Okay. This is super important to understand. So the US wouldn't go broke on debt denominated its own currency, neither would Pakistan. But because Pakistan is totally dependent on other producers of goods and services, it requires a currency not their own. And therefore, the debts that they're having to pay are not debts that they can cure with their own currency. They're debts that they need to be able to provide currency within that foreign space. The debt that they owe is denominated in another currency. That is the stranglehold. If you have debt denominated in a foreign currency, you are fucked unless you can produce goods and services enough to sell to those people to deal with that foreign currency debt. Never let anyone tell you printing money causes inflation or hyperinflation. They're wrong 100 times out of 100. Okay? 100 times out of 100. All right, let's get back to this. So the question of how Pakistan overcame its financing obstacles has remained a mystery even to those following the situation professionally. The IMF issues public accounting of its reviews, Rafiq noted, but doing so if the financial or financing relates to secret military projects presents an unusual challenge. Pakistan is a very strange in many ways, he said, but I don't know how a secret, covert, clandestine military program would figure into their calculations because everything's supposed to be open and by the books and all that. Look at that. It's pretty rough place, man. Life is hard right now, and they are all on strike. They're literally fighting and protest over this bullshit that the IMF is pulling on them. So Imran Khan, Ukraine, and the Pakistan's future. At the start of the Ukraine war, Pakistan was in a markedly different geopolitical and economic position. When the conflict began, Khan, at the time the prime minister, was in the air on the way to Moscow for a long-planned bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The visit outraged American officials. As The Intercept previously reported, Liu, the senior State Department official, said in a meeting with then Pakistani Ambassador Asad Majid Khan 2 weeks after the invasion that it was the belief of the U.S. that Pakistan had to take a neutral position solely at Khan's direction, adding that all would be forgiven if Khan was removed in the no confidence vote. Since his ouster, Pakistan has firmly taken the side of the U.S. and Ukraine in the war. The U.S., meanwhile, continues to deny that it put its thumbs on the scale of Pakistani democracy for Ukraine or any other reason. At an off-the-record virtual town hall with members of the Pakistani diaspora at the end of August, Liu's deputy, Elizabeth Horst, responded to questions about the Intercept's reporting on Liu's meeting with the Pakistani ambassador. I want to take a moment to address disinformation about how the United States' role in Pakistani politics, Horst said at the top of the call, audio of which was provided to the Intercept by an attendee. We do not let propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation get in the way of any bilateral relationship, including our valued relationship with Pakistan. The United States does not have a position on one political candidate or one party versus another. Any claims to the contrary, including reports on the alleged cipher, are false, and senior Pakistani officials themselves acknowledge this isn't true. Senior Pakistani officials, including former Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, have confirmed the authenticity of the cable, known internally as cipher, published by The Intercept. Van Hollen in the meeting and his press briefing with Pakistani journalists took the same line as the State Department, saying that he had been assured by the administration that the U.S. did not interfere in Pakistani politics. So as you dig into this, and this thing keeps going on and on, okay? Actually, I take that back. It's almost done, right? So while Pakistani reels from the impact of IMF-directed austerity policies and the political dysfunction that followed Khan's removal, its new military leaders have made lofty promises that foreign economic support will rescue the country. Anyway, the little evidence, however, that the Gulf nations are willing to come to Pakistan's rescue. The absence of foreign support left Pakistan's embattled military regime further dependent on the IMF, the US, and the production of munitions for the war in Ukraine to sustain itself through a crisis that shows no sign of revolution or resolution. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, close that out. I'm going to put this link inside of the thing. And yes, I just want to thank Greg Roast for bringing this to my attention. Folks, this is the stuff that when you understand economics, you start caring about, you start paying attention to. When you see the word IMF and you see loans together, you know that there is a string attached. You know that this is the arm of US empire. And ultimately, in the end, it doesn't have good news for the people of the country that are about to take on that loan. Loans like this, these debts, are not debts of, hey, we need money. They're debts of A, payola to the military contractors, et cetera, and B, a form of control to absolutely extract and structure those societies for maximum predation. Okay. This, my friends, is your US policy, and more to the point, the strong arm of empire. This is war. So when you act like economics doesn't matter, when you act like the macro doesn't matter, and your eyes glaze over and you tune out, remember, you're skipping a huge part of the anti-war movement. The anti-war movement is completely and utterly feckless without knowledge of how the economic system works. There is no anti-war movement without an anti-austerity movement. Austerity is murder in every meaningful way. So please remember this. Anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. Please, I put the link in the chat right there. If somebody wants to put it in after the thing goes live so people can see it after the live stream, please add it there. I'll put it in the show notes as well. With that, I am Steve Grumbine. I am the Rogue Scholar, and I am out of here.